Tonight we're going to be talking about the muse of desire, Eros and Awakening. In the past few months, we've spoken a lot about the question of desire and spiritual life from a number of different perspectives. I'd like to review just for a moment. We began by discussing the art of asking and the interplay between desire and generosity, the giving and receiving of help, and why reciprocity is the most ancient of human impulses. It was hardwired into our brains when saber-toothed tigers still walk the earth. Reciprocity is central to our morality as social creatures who rely on one another for our very survival. As I mentioned to you, the golden rule, which is reciprocity in action, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, is the only belief that is common to all spiritual traditions across the globe, the only one. Next, we talked about the fearless heart, courage, forgiveness, and love, and we looked at how indispensable our desires for more life, for awakening, for intimacy, for love, for forgiveness are to full engagement with our own existence. Even though desire is often vilified in certain spiritual circles, treated as an obstacle rather than as an opportunity on the seeker's path, we came to understand that desire is in fact the fuel that propels personal evolution. Remember, what makes the engine go, Stanley Kunitz wrote in his poem, Desire, Desire, Desire. Now, while clinging to desire and fixated hope is the root of suffering, of course, desire itself is a precious energy that adheres toward growth and toward healing. Without the desire to expand our minds and hearts and spirit, where would we find the will to practice or to persevere through the inevitable dark and difficult times? Next, in The Shadow Knows, Discovering Your Secret Knowledge, we explored those dark and unconscious aspects of the psyche, including desires, impulses, and yearnings that we keep hidden from ourselves and others, and which block our personal power and wisdom. In The Day of Laughter, Enlightenment in Everyday Life, we looked at the connection between desire for freedom and the fear of liberation. And finally, last month, in Take Off the Mask, Ending the Imposter Syndrome, we investigated the theme of inauthenticity and how we distort and hide ourselves for fear of revealing our personal truths, the inconvenient truths that constitute who we are when we stop pretending. Now, this month, we come to the theme of desire as it relates to erotic living and the profound, mysterious, and powerful role that Eros plays in spiritual awakening. We misunderstand the true meaning of Eros in our culture. In our materialist society, Eros is reduced to sex. If you open any dictionary, you're going to find these two terms, erotic and sexual, used interchangeably. But in fact, this is incorrect. It's incomplete. Reducing the erotic to the merely sexual is like claiming that pornography is synonymous with true love. Now, I don't believe there's anything wrong with sex or pornography, but to mistake the divine power and mystery of Eros for the physical gyrations and climax, no matter how wonderful they might be, really is to miss a major point about the depth and the breadth and the possibility of the erotic. Eros is the force that animates us, that drives us, and that compels us toward mystic union with all of creation. As spiritual creatures in physical bodies, we enjoy copulation with the bodies of others, but we long equally to penetrate, to cleave to, and inhabit the sacred embrace of life itself, to know ourselves as lover and beloved in the cosmic dance. For all its joys and wonders, the physical act of sex is a tiny part, a pale reflection of that greater erotic force that is generating the universe itself. Did you know that in Zoroastrian faith, it's believed that gravity, the force that draws planets together in space, is love itself? The 19th century philosopher John Dewey has a wonderful way of linking this astronomical cohesive power to the same force that motivates us as spiritual beings. This is how Dewey puts it. The spiritual life gets its surest and most ample guarantees when it is learned that the laws and conditions of righteousness are implicated in the working processes of the universe. When it is found that man, in his conscious struggles, in his doubts, temptations, and defeats, in his aspirations and successes, is moved on and buoyed up by the forces which have developed nature. How beautiful is that? In other words, the universal force of attraction that draws the planets together and the stars, this energy that has been described as love itself, is the same wholeness that draws us together as people, and it keeps us reaching for connection with others and union with the transcendent, or God. That's why in ancient times, Eros, the god, was believed to be the bridge between the physical and the divine worlds. That living, pulsating, expansive, connective power that holds the whole thing together and constitutes our very essence. Now, when we view Eros in this sacred, pervasive way, we come to understand why it is that sex is merely the tip of the erotic iceberg. Now, the operative word here is wholeness. Wholeness. All of spiritual life, as you know, centers on the desire to remember and return to the wholeness of life, to integrate seemingly opposite parts, and to recognize the one in the many. Although we dress up this holistic urge in a wide variety of costumes and traditions, each with their own unique flavor and customs and stories and belief systems, they all focus on the move toward wholeness in seemingly different shapes and sizes. A return to integrity, which comes from the root for wholeness of body and mind and spirit, after falling, so to speak, into ignorance and separation in human life. Eros is the glue that enables our many parts to cohere into wholeness. When we come together in this unified way, and we know ourselves to be inseparable at every single moment from all of creation, that is what it means to live with erotic wisdom. But the question is, how do we do this? How can we awaken erotically and join forces with the muse of desire? What are the tools for remembering this wholeness? I'd just like to talk to you tonight about 5 different portals to erotic connection, practices that you can use to connect to the greater whole through your physical senses. And I'm going to be leaving off the 6th sense, which is intuition, which I'll be talking about in the video lesson about bringing passion back into practice. Okay, so tonight we're just going to begin with sight, with the power of sight. More than any of our other senses, seeing is the great deceiver. Seeing is the great separator, the preserver of the illusion that we're many, and also the sense that prevents us from seeing the one. When we look out onto the world, we see a multiplicity of individual forms. We see trees and we see cars, we see human beings that appear to exist autonomously in a disconnected sort of semi-coherence. Our eyes confirm this and assure us the separateness is so. If you observe yourself as you move through the world, you will probably imagine yourself as a separate creature, untethered, free to come and go, to interact or not with those around you. Seeing tells us that boundaries exist between the self and everything else, that who I am and what I contain stops at the barrier of my skin. But what about when we close our eyes and make this picture disappear? I'd like you to try this for 15 minutes and see what happens. Close your eyes and settle for a moment. Then try to feel, to actually experience the separation between the inside and the outside, between what is you and what is not you. Do your best to draw a clear outline around your physical body and notice yourself doing it. Notice how abstract, how mental this line of separation actually is. Then ask yourself if you can neither feel nor imagine this impermeable boundary between what is you and not you, the boundary created by your eyes, if in fact the absence of sight causes it to disappear completely, how real can this boundary be? How deceived are we all, by the organs of seeing, provided, of course, that we're sighted people, that we're not blind? Take a moment to reflect on this illusory sense of separation and how it fosters alienation, estrangement, and spiritual blindness. Then, with your eyes still closed, imagine dissolving this individual boundary of skin and seeing it as porous, permeable, breathing, open. Be aware of how enlarged you feel, how vast and how peaceful, when you're freed of the need to hold yourself together, to clutch at your separateness, and to defend against the outside world. Feel yourself pulsing with the universe, being breathed by life itself. Next, we come to the sense of physical touch. Now, magnificent as the sense of touch is, touch only allows us to experience the surfaces of life. Just as the eyes perceive only separation, touch confirms it through tactile means. When you run your fingers over the arm of the chair you're sitting in, or the desk you're sitting in front of, for instance, the receptors in your skin inform you of the solidity of objects, the impenetrability of surfaces. But a physicist knows that this isn't the truth, that there is in fact no such thing as a solid object, subatomically speaking. So our fingers may be said, in fact, to lie to us, just as our eyes do. Touch gives access to barriers, not interiors, even when, as in sex, we are inside another person. It's interesting to notice what happens, though, when we remove touch from a surface. And to experiment with this, just try holding your hands up in front of you with your arms outstretched. Once again, close your eyes and begin to sense the skin of your fingers and where they exist in space. Notice the sensations, the tingling, the shifts in temperature, all passing over the surface of your skin. Now, try to touch from the inside out. Try to touch the space around your hands using the inside of your fingers. At first, this is going to sound like nonsense, but just bear with me. Reaching outward from the inside of your fingers, imaginatively, remaining in a still position, you'll notice that a subtle awareness starts to arise in you of something that you might describe as touch without touching, as touch without a surface. This form of metaphysical touch has really nothing to do with the physical body. It's consciousness itself interacting with its own environment. Try this for just 5 minutes. Then open your eyes and notice how different you feel. Run your fingers along the surface of the same object, the chair or the table, and experience the difference, the aliveness, the cohesion between the touching and the touched. Next, we're going to move on to the ears and our sense of hearing. We're constantly being bombarded by sounds from the outside world. A wall of noise that issues from beyond the self and echoes back through our hearing. With the exception of gurgling intestines or creaking bones, all sound appears to arise from the outside in. Hearing, like our other senses, seems like a gateway between us and other, and an auditory boundary that we erect to protect our inner world. Of course, hearing can give us pleasure. We hear music that we love, or poetry, the voices of those we love, the sound of the sea. We feel pleasure when we hear. When we hear others in pain, or traffic noise, or dentist drills, that kind of thing, we feel pain. But what happens to hearing in the absence of sound? And how can hearing unite us with the divine in a way that surpasses even the most transcendental musical compositions? The answer is, of course, through silence. Mystic traditions have long prescribed silence as the medicine that heals the mind. As the great Saint Meher Baba put it, things that are real are given and received in silence. That's also why Meher Baba was silent for the last 35 years of his life and communicated only through an alphabet board, to demonstrate the power of this living silence, of being what is called muni, mute, regathering sound into oneself. That's why if you've ever been on a silent retreat, you've experienced firsthand the healing, clarifying power of not speaking. You've also probably noticed how silence awakens a different kind of hearing, a hearing of the small, still voice within us. It's not until we step away from the noise of the world, either geographically as on a retreat or through some practice, such as meditation, that we can hear our own inner guidance. Silence plays a comparable role to darkness in spiritual awakening. Just as all of creation germinates in and emerges out of primordial darkness, so do the wisdom and peace that surpass understanding emerge from silence. If you have the opportunity, try to remain silent for an entire day. It's a radical, revolutionary thing to do, and you'll be amazed by how different you feel afterward, how replenished, recentered, and quieted and calmed. During the day, as you're being silent, try noticing how outside the din of your thinking, obsessive mind, just beyond this helmet of noise, is an unfathomable, extraordinary silence that's always present. Rather than meeting the world through the filter of this cacophonous mind, imagine this noisy little mind not as the screen through which the world has to come, but as a tiny, unpeaceful thing that's floating in this great silence. If you can't take a day for silent retreat, just try being quiet for an hour when you know that the silence is going to be protected. And notice how clearly you can hear your own thoughts. And even though that can be crazy-making sometimes, as anyone knows who meditates, we also notice that thoughts, sensations arise and dissipate of their own accord. They settle back into this eternal silence. They're self-dissolving. Now close your eyes and notice between these thoughts that the silence is always there, and begin to listen to that silence. Let it bathe you. And realize and remember that it's always waiting right there, just beyond your boisterous, unsettled mind. Remembering that the silence is your very essence, and that you can access it at any time you want by turning hearing inward and stepping away from the wall of noise. What this does is unifies and enlivens and replenishes the entire being, and it awakens us to erotic spiritual connection. Next, we come to the sense of smell, which is an interesting one. Our nose helps us navigate the external world. It protects us from what's unhealthy and toxic, and attracts us to the nourishing, the comforting, and the pleasant. But since the organ of smell is also the organ of breathing, our very existence depends on the exchange. You can live without hearing, you can live without touching, you can live without smelling, you can live without seeing. You can't live without smelling, without breathing. Okay? Our existence depends on the exchange, the inspiration of the air itself into our internal organs. More than any of the other senses, smell contradicts the notion of inner versus outer. Who can say where breathing begins and ends? The human body is open-valved. We have open valves. The nose and the mouth must remain open for us to stay alive, which is why the observation of breath as the object of attention is such a powerful practice for awakening to the inseparability of self with the environment. Let me repeat that. The nose and mouth must remain open for us to stay alive. And that's why the observation of breath as the object of our attention is such a powerful root practice for awakening to the inseparability, the erotic connection between self and environment. If you meditate, you may have experienced those moments when the outer and the inner become one in the process of breathing. If you don't meditate, try this experiment with smell and breathing to know what I mean. Find a quiet place to sit down and close your eyes. Now notice what you smell in the room around you and label these smells in your mind. Tomato sauce, gardenias, Febreze. Breathe these smells in deeply and identify the qualities, sweet, sour, pungent, that distinguish them. Once you've done this, move your attention to the breath itself as it moves in and out through your nostrils, the sensations of temperature, tickling the hairs in your nose, the whoosh of air pumping in and out. Allow the breathing to happen on its own, without forcing it. And as this happens, become aware that you are being breathed by a force that is much larger than yourself. That this force is the power of Eros drawing life into your body. Be aware that this action of breathing, the expansion and contraction of your lungs, is inseparable from the same movements happening throughout all of creation. The whole cosmos is breathing. And it is this breath, this prana, this energy that links you to all that is and that makes you whole. And finally, we come to taste. Taste is closely linked to desire, of course. When our gustatory sense is awakened, we feel appetite, which leads either to nourishment in the case of helpful foods or destruction in the case of toxic substances. In this sense, taste can be fairly undiscriminating. We may know that the taste of tobacco is linked to self-harm, yet feel drawn through habit and chemical addiction to taste this noxious smoke again and again, without the possibility of complete satisfaction, which is as good a definition of addiction as I know. I once had a professor in college who said he was a chain smoker, and he used to say that smoking was the perfect vice because it could never be satisfied. Well, he fell dead of a heart attack when he was 43. Of all the senses, taste is the most connected to dukkha, to the unsatisfactoriness of sensory experience that always keeps us wanting more and leads to the clinging and craving that cause suffering. And there's no disputing taste. I know a British woman whose favorite meal is tripe, a substance that you couldn't pay me to eat. One person's delicacy is another person's poison. Being so highly subjective, taste is a tricky bridge to cross as a path to erotic awakening. A few years back, Ken Wilber wrote a book called One Taste, and that taste was the taste of what he calls integral spirituality. Okay, that he was referring to a spiritual taste that pervades all traditions, the taste of awakening, the unifying taste that informs and underlies all spiritual paths. But he might as well have been describing the one taste that underlies earthly consumption, physical taste, the taste, whether bitter or sweet or pleasant or vile, that comes to us via our taste buds and tongue, as messengers of the physical world, as reminders of our material life, taken in through the mouth, that connects us to the earth. Tasting and eating are glaring examples of the body as a vehicle of transformation, the vessel of physical alchemy, and a reminder of the erotic force that we partake of but cannot control. You only need to look at your own digestion to realize how little control you have over keeping yourself alive, or how Eros, as the life-giving force of the cosmos, is actually running your system night and day. For awakening our erotic connection, there's nothing I've found that beats the raisin practice. The raisin practice is great and simple. Just take a handful of raisins to a quiet place. Get comfortable and close your eyes. Now slip a raisin onto your tongue. Let it rest there a moment, and then slowly chew the raisin, pausing between each chew to savor the flavor that's being released, the particular raisinness. and make sure to chew each raisin at least 10 times. At first, your mind will probably rebel, and you'll want to throw the whole lot of raisins in your mouth at once and chew fast and swallow fast. But you're going to counter this impulse with mindfulness. And what you're going to find is if we learned to bring a fraction of this raisin practice to the dinner table, how much happier and healthier and less fat we would be. That's because we'd be enjoying our food erotically, from the inside out, rather than as mere consumption. I mean, how many meals have you had in your life where afterward you didn't remember eating? You didn't remember chewing a single thing. You're just sitting there feeling bloated and dazed and confused. When we de-eroticize erotic experiences like eating, through junk food, for example, or sex through pornography, or spiritual practice through rote repetition void of passion, we live diminished lives. Eros brings passion back to the table, and that's why it's so important. Now, before I close, I just want to say a word or two on bringing passion and pleasure back to spiritual practice. This is so important. Too often we make our practice into hard labor, into a long slog, a duty-driven obligation, an observance of some form or other that meant something to us once, but no longer has as much meaning for us. Our relationship to our practice is just like our relationship to anything else. It has to be maintained. It has to be tweaked. It has to be revivified through variety, taking a break, through questioning, or through surprising ourselves in some way that snaps us back to attention, so that practice starts to matter again, so that we focus on waking up every moment. Just as we can take a marriage for granted, for example, we can take our practice for granted and lose our erotic connection to faith or devotion or inquiry or sitting. When this happens, it's very important to find a way of re-eroticizing our relationship to spiritual life. If you're a meditator, try some yoga. If you're an expert in asana practice, in yogic practice, then explore something psychodynamic or interactive. Expand, explore, and well-round yourself. And honestly, to the defenders of the faith, the fundamentalists, who believe that enlightenment depends on how many times you bow, or the color of your robe, or repeating some gospel to the letter. To those folks who will come up in your, if not literally in your life, at least in your mind, judging you for taking a break, or for obeying the needs of your own body when doing your spiritual practice, and bringing passion back into your practice. To those folks, just simply say, mind your own business, please. Your path is your path, okay? It's your relationship, and it needs passion. It needs eros. So this month, I'd like you to ask yourself, where have you de-eroticized your life? What areas of your life are lacking passion? Where could you connect more profoundly? Where are you living from the outside in rather than the inside out? And how does that feel? And how can you change it? How do you relate to silence, really? Does silence scare you the same way that freedom scares you? Too many possibilities, too much space, too much aloneness or mystery? And what about desire? How do you square desire with spiritual life, with surrender? How do you square desire with faith? How do you square desire with conformity? Do you avoid your wants, or are you driven by them? Either extreme leads us to a lot of unhappiness. Are you the slave of desire? Are you an addict who can never get enough? In thinking about our erotic lives, these are very useful questions to explore. And I really do hope that you'll begin to explore some of them in your own writing. It can be enormously helpful. Just a word on why answering questions in writing helps. Every time you practice self-inquiry in writing, you turn the gear on the wheel of your own evolution. You open the window a little wider onto your inner life. The more questions you explore, the more you wake up. So try to choose 1 or 2 or 5 questions a month, whatever works for you, to look at up close and personal. It doesn't take more than 20 minutes to explore one of these questions. And I promise you, it will give rise to insight. It will give rise to wisdom in seeing yourself as separate from your story. And that will lead you toward illumination and toward transformation. It will.